Welcome to Carly's Colorful Corner, where we will learn how to draw an opossum using a fan brush or a toothbrush to create realistic texture when it comes to fur. For this piece, you are going to be needing a small brush, a medium brush, and preferably a fan brush or a toothbrush of some sort. With that being said, let's get started. All right, let's take that small brush and get it damp with water. We don't want too much water. We're looking for a towel dry kind of texture. You know how you dry your hair with a towel and when you're done, it's still a little wet? Well, that's kind of what we're looking for here. Take that brush and gather up some black paint. You might have to swirl your brush around in your black paint palette before applying it to the paper. The main goal here is we're using a mostly dry brush. It's slightly damp, and we are kind of applying a thick layer of paint to the outline of our opossum's legs. Just the legs and the areas that are super dark, like the ears or the underbelly. Don't complete this outline with the rest of the body. If you do, you're going to defeat the purpose of getting a realistic kind of image that we're kind of aiming for this class. We're actually going to use these outlines that we've placed on the paper to do a controlled wash with a medium brush. So once you're done doing that outline, I want you to get your medium brush damp, the same consistency as which you used with your small brush, but this time don't add any paint. We're going to do a wash where we use water to thin out the edge of this outline, and we're going to drag and pull it into the shape of the leg. This is going to give you a controlled wash. It's going to ensure that your water doesn't splooge all over the place. Because you're using a minimal amount of water, and no paint, you're actually using that small amount of water to kind of thin out and spread that paint around the shape of your leg. It's a super cool technique that you can use outside of class to help fill in areas of color in a quick and efficient manner, but also in a controlled manner where hopefully you're not adding too much paint as you go. As you're doing this technique, there will be times where you will need to kind of run your damp brush along the line of paint that you've put down on your paper, kind of scooping up that extra paint that you've placed, and then you might need to drag it a little to another area. That's perfectly normal. You might have to go up and down a few times with your brush to smooth out the paint and make sure it's equally distributed across your paper. This will help prevent areas from getting too dark, and you can also take that paint that you've scooped up and place it into other areas to help darken them as well. It's a lot of push and pulling of your values here. Once you are done doing this technique with the legs, you can keep your brush damp. I wouldn't worry too much about revisiting your brush, revisiting your paint in this part of your painting. I would actually encourage you to um, use the very little paint that's on your brush and use it to your advantage. This is a perfect time to kind of clock in those lighter shadows, those light grays, because you don't have as much paint on your paper. Feel free to borrow or to take some of that paint if you need it just a little bit darker from your leg, because you can easily add some more darkness to that area and revisit it once it dries. But it's so hard to get light textures or light shadow shapes using watercolor because you have to have a very finite amount of paint, but you have to have the right consistency of water. So keep your brush damp at this point. You might need like a little drop on the corner of your brush of with water to kind of rehydrate it, but don't go too crazy with the water because it will really kind of muck up your dark areas that you've just placed on the paper. For example, I am using a medium-sized brush. I am just picking up some pieces of my paint from my legs using the corner of my brush, and the rest of my brush literally just has a damp layer of water to it. And I am thinning out that paint so much that I'm creating a really light gray. Now, what I can do is I can go back to my palette at add just a little dab of paint on the corner of my brush, and then I can use that corner piece to kind of draw in some texture here if I really want to. Totally up to you. Don't forget to also do this process with your face, but as you can see, your face is actually a little bit lighter than the body of the opossum itself. So keep that in mind when doing the face. Make sure that you have a diluted amount of paint when you're working with that area. You can also even add a little tiny bit of water to your brush as it starts drying out, just a little drop, and kind of run it across those extra layers of paint that you've just put on your paper. Run it across those areas to kind of blend them out and soften those lines so it kind of looks like a shadow shape instead of drawn in texture. This will help give you that kind of blotchy feel that we have on this opossum's body, but it will also help you build the shadows from light to dark. Now that I have most of the body done, I am going to go back and make sure that my body is decently dry before I start applying paint to the ears, eyes, and the nose because I don't want to accidentally apply paint to a wet area and then that wet area give that paint the allowance to spread all over the place. So just make sure your area is pretty dry or mostly dry before continuing forward. If you need to pause this video and take a timestamp, feel free to do so. We will get into the finite texture pieces once we are done doing the main body of the opossum itself. So let's finish up these eyes, these nose, and this mouth, and add some finishing touches, and then I will show you how to use your toothbrush or your fan brush to kind of add some texture to the fur and to block in the grass. Your fan brush is sort of big, and so is your toothbrush, but you can choose to use it for this part of your project. I prefer to use a smaller brush to allow me more control over my textures. So we're going to go in with more paint, a little less water, and a little more paint. And we are actually going to start building and scratching in these fur marks here that are super small. And after we're done doing that, we could use the fan brush to feather them out. Totally up to you. If you like the scratchy look, then keep it. This is your art, your choice. Whatever you do, don't forget to add some undershadow to that tail to make that tail pop and to add a little bit of shading or shadow to the edge of your opossum's face to kind of make it stand out from the background. When doing this piece, I made the mistake of actually putting in my whiskers before putting in the grass. I highly recommend you wait before you put in your whiskers. When you do put them in, you're going to use a feather light touch where just the bristles of your tiny brush are butterfly kissing it across your paper. Very, very light strokes to kind of feather in those whiskers. The reason I say do it after your grass is so that way you don't have to paint around your grass. Um, I- Paint around your whiskers when putting in your grass. If you want to add textures of brown to your fur, like we have here in our image, you can also rinse out your brush and add a decent amount of, brown to those areas. I would just lightly sketch in scratches of color at this point because we're going to end up using our fan brush to blend it all together. When you're ready, you can use your dry or a little bit of a damp fan brush to blend all of those little streaks of brown that you've put in your on your paper, or you can decide to use a toothbrush or a dry regular brush. You don't want it too damp at this point because you A, don't want to overwork your paper, and B, you're already working with a kind of a moist or a wet surface here. So you don't want too much water because it will cause your really bold striking lines that you've put in there. It will cause them to muddy up. So just go carefully with this next step. Work on a small area at first to make sure that you have the right consistency of dampness to your brush. If it's too wet, you can always squeeze it out, but work small and then work broad. So now that we've blocked in the body of our opossum, it is now time to kind of block in the grass and the sky using a thin wash for each. So let's add a section of translucent, clear, very thin layer of water from the edge of your paper to the edge of your opossum's body. Work in this section alone at this current moment in time because your paper might dry quickly and it will make it hard for you to spread the dot of paint around on your paper once you're ready. So after you're done applying that thin translucent layer of water, you're going to add a small little dot on the corner of your brush with paint of your choice. And you are going to put that dot on your translucent layer of water and move it around on your paper until you start filling that white space with a pale color of green. Let's repeat the same step with the sky. Since we've worked from top to bottom with the grass, your top piece here should actually be dry enough to start working on the sky. Add a thin layer of water, then add a drop of blue. Keep doing this throughout your entire piece from bottom up to the top. And by the time you're done with the top, your bottom should be dry enough to start adding some grass. When you add the grass, get that fan brush of yours damp and lather up a bunch of green and start making some swooping, swishing kind of motions with your brush to mimic the nature of grass. If you want some blades to be darker, add an additional layer of paint using the fan brush. And that, my friend, is how you create an opossum in a realistic manner using watercolor.